The air was thick with smoke and the metallic temps of blood. Screams echoed through the dim corridors, punctuated by the dull, relentless thud of boots on stone floors. In the shadows of the camp, a woman in a white coat moved swiftly, her hands trembling yet precise as she tended to soldiers whose eyes were wide with terror. Who was this doctor, captured and trapped, yet moving among the wounded with a courage nobody dared speak of? Every step she took brought her closer to danger. Every patient she touched, a potential betrayal to those watching her. Then, a distant shout cut through the chaos. A new prisoner had arrived. Someone who held a secret that could destroy everything. She froze. And in that heartbeat, everything changed. Asterisk, it was the winter of 1944. Deep within a remote POW camp carved into the hills of Eastern Europe. Guards patrolled with rifles slung over their shoulders, their eyes sharp, their cruelty familiar. Inside, the prisoners whispered in fear, haunted by the disappearances that seemed to happen every night. Among them was Dr. Elisa Morgan, a young physician whose life had been dedicated to saving others. Now, her skills were both her greatest weapon and her greatest risk. If the camp authorities discovered her secret work, she would not survive the week. And yet, behind her calm eyes, a plan was forming, a dangerous, forbidden mission that could save hundreds of lives, or doom her forever. But what exactly was she doing in the shadows? And who among the prisoners could be trusted? Asterisk, the night was deceptively quiet. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes every creak and whisper sound like a roar. Inside the camp, prisoners huddled in their makeshift bunks, clutching thin blankets, their eyes darting to the shadows with fear. Dr. Eliza Morgan moved carefully along the corridor, her breath clouding in the cold air, her fingers clutching the small medical satchel she carried everywhere. Each step was measured, but the quiet was broken suddenly by a sharp, metallic clang, the sound of a gate swinging open too violently. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she froze, the satchel pressed to her chest. A new prisoner had been dragged in, and he wasn't just any man. He was an officer, young but hardened, his uniform torn and smeared with mud, a coded message clutched tightly in his hand. Guards shoved him roughly against the wall, shouting in guttural tones that made the room vibrate with fear. The other prisoner shrank back, but Eliza's eyes never left him. Something about the way he moved, the way he glanced around as though expecting a trap, made her pulse quicken. She knew immediately that this wasn't routine. This officer carried information that the camp authorities could kill for, and yet, in the chaos of his arrival, one small detail caught her attention. The message slipped from his grasp. God. Tumbling silently onto the cold stone floor at her feet. Time seemed to slow. Every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. The acrid smell of damp stone and human sweat filled her nostrils. The officer's eyes locked on hers for a split second, panic and silent pleading intermingling. Around her, guards barked orders, but she barely heard them, focusing entirely on the folded piece of paper. It might contain the names of prisoners marked for death, plans of experiments hidden in the camp, or even escape routes. Her hands trembled as she reached down and picked it up suddenly. Shadow moved at the edge of the corridor, one of the camp's doctors, a cruel man whose loyalty to authority was absolute. He paused as though sensing something off, and his eyes swept the room. Every prisoner froze. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the silence. Elisa knew that if he realized what she had just intercepted, the consequences would be immediate and deadly. She had seconds to act. Her mind raced. Destroy the note, hide it, or risk everything to decipher it. And before she could decide, the officer let out a barely audible whisper. They're watching. Everything. The tension in the room was electric, and for a moment it felt as if the walls themselves were closing in. The micro cliffhanger struck here. Would the doctor notice? Would she be caught holding the message that could unravel the camp's most guarded secrets? Every move, every breath, was now a choice between life and death. And in that instant, Eliza realized she was no longer just a healer. She was part of a dangerous game. One where a single misstep could ignite a chain of horrors she might never escape. Asterisk, the camp had become a living nightmare. Smoke curled from the chimneys and scorched buildings. its acrid stench mixing with the coppery temps of blood. Every step Eliza took echoed against the cold stone floors, each footfall a reminder of the fragile line between life and death. Outside, the storm of chaos unfolded like a terrible symphony, shouting guards, screams from prisoners, the crash of falling supplies, and the distant rattle of gunfire from the surrounding hills. The cold bit into her hands as she clutched her medical satchel, her fingers numb but nimble, moving as if guided by instinct rather than thought. From the command tower, the camp overseer's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the barracks below. Reports came in sporadically, voices breaking under tension. The overseer did not yet realize that a single doctor was orchestrating quiet revolutions within his own walls. Eliza moved like a shadow, slipping between the injured and the unsuspecting, administering treatment in whispers. The flickering candlelight illuminated the panic on the prisoners' faces. Their eyes wide, hands trembling as they tried to keep still. Every cry seemed magnified, echoing off stone walls as if the camp itself were alive. Listening, judging, a sudden explosion in the supply depot sent a plume of fire into the sky. The building shook violently, splintering wood and shattering glass, sending shards raining into the courtyard. Prisoners screamed and scattered, some tripping over debris, others frozen with fear. Eliza's heart jumped into her throat, but she did not hesitate. She sprinted toward the nearest barracks, her coat flaring behind her. Weaving between panicked prisoners and guards, shouting orders she could barely hear, the chaos was complete. A storm of terror that left every sense heightened. She heard the groan of a trapped soldier beneath rubble, smelled the acrid smoke curling into the open windows, felt the sharp sting of falling dust in her eyes. And yet, even amid the destruction, she moved with precision, administering care to those who would have been left for dead. At the same time, in a separate wing, the camp doctor Accrual, imposing man was realizing that something unusual was happening. His rounds had always been routine, predictable, controllable, but now whispers of Eliza's midnight interventions had reached him. His assistant trembled beside him as they noticed missing medical supplies. Small but essential notes tucked into hidden corners and, most alarmingly, small improvements in prisoners previously marked for decline. The doctor's eyes narrowed. He began retracing the steps of every prisoner he had treated, the thought of subversion crawling through his mind. His suspicion ignited a tension that spread through the camp like wildfire. Guards began patrolling more aggressively, their boots pounding against stone floors in a relentless rhythm. Eliza's perspective shifted rapidly, eyes scanning the courtyard from a top-floor window. She could see shadows darting between buildings, hear the muffled cries of prisoners hiding in corners. Her own breathing was loud, ragged, yet controlled. She whispered soothing words to a wounded man, feeling the tremor in his hand as he grasped hers. Every second brought the possibility of discovery, every movement a potential trigger for violent punishment. She had to balance speed with caution. A single misstep could result in not just her death, but the deaths of dozens under her care. Then came a sudden noise, a door slammed open, and a guard's flashlight swept across the room. Eliza froze, holding a syringe poised above a patient's arm. The light passed, lingering for a torturous second before moving on. The micro cliffhanger sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She exhaled silently, barely daring to move, listening to the rhythm of distant footsteps that could belong to friends or enemies. In this moment, the camp felt impossibly small and impossibly vast at once, each corridor a maze, each shadow a potential threat. Asterisk, meanwhile, the prisoners themselves were reacting to the chaos in different ways. Some were paralyzed by fear, unable to move, faces pale and eyes wide. Others acted with desperate courage, forming small groups to help the wounded or extinguish small fires that threatened to spread. Whispers of Eliza's courage circulated, tales of a ghostly doctor moving through the inferno, healing without regard for her own safety. These whispered stories became sparks of hope, tiny flames in a sea of despair, and they spread from barracks to barracks with incredible speed. Reaching those too weak or too afraid to stand on their own, from the command center, reports grew more frantic. A supply wagon had exploded near the perimeter, a guard had gone missing, and some prisoners were attempting to flee the chaos. The overseer slammed a fist against the desk, sending papers fluttering like frightened birds. Outside, the wind carried smoke and ash through the camp, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that made it impossible to tell friend from foe. Guards fired warning shots, the echo bouncing off walls and creating disorienting confusion. Eliza moved through the pandemonium, offering guidance, direction, and care. She became both healer and tactician, moving silently among people who could easily mistake her intentions, using shadows and noise to her advantage. A particularly dramatic moment unfolded when a barracks partially collapsed. Eliza dove into the rubble, pulling out 2 prisoners trapped beneath beams. Dust choked her lungs, scratches tore at her hands and face, but she ignored the pain, whispering reassurances as she lifted and carried the wounded to safety. A guard appeared at the doorway, eyes wide, weapon raised, but she melted into the shadows before he could react. The scene shifted from panic to near miracle, highlighting her skill, determination, and the razor-thin line between survival and death. Each micro cliffhanger: will she be discovered? Will the prisoners escape? Will the fire spread? Kept the tension taut? Eliza's perspective alternated rapidly with the guards and overseers, giving the narrative a dynamic, pulse-pounding rhythm. She found herself hiding supplies in hollow beams, slipping coded messages to prisoners too terrified to move, and improvising medical interventions with what little remained after the chaos. Every room presented a new challenge: fires, smoke, injured prisoners, suspicious guards, the looming presence of the cruel camp doctor. And yet she never hesitated. Her mind moved faster than her legs, plotting, calculating, and reacting instinctively. The stakes escalated with each passing second. Each new event layered upon the last. By the end of the 10-minute escalation window, the camp had transformed from a place of oppressive routine into a maelstrom of violence, fear, and courage. Smoke-filled corridors, echoing screams, shattered glass, frantic footsteps, and whispered tales of a fearless doctor created a perfect storm of chaos. Eliza had become the eye of this storm, a figure of both hope and terror, navigating a labyrinth where every decision could trigger catastrophe or salvation. The camp command center seethed with panic, prisoners whispered of miracles, and the air was thick with anticipation. Something monumental was about to happen, and nobody, not even Eliza, could predict the outcome. And then, a sudden sound, a low, menacing rumble from the nearby hill, the unmistakable echo of heavy machinery approaching, signaled that the chaos was far from over. The micro cliffhanger set the stage for the next phase: either escape, revelation, or total disaster. Step 5, the escalation to climax, would push every character, every decision, and every fear to the absolute limit. The night had grown darker, the cold seeping into every bone, making muscles stiff and hearts race faster. Eliza Morgan moved through the camp like a shadow, every step deliberate, every breath measured. Though inside she felt the hurricane of fear and urgency. Around her, chaos had reached a new peak. Flames from the earlier explosions continued to dance along the edges of barracks and supply stores, casting flickering, sinister shadows that twisted over walls and faces. Smoke filled the air, thick and pungent, stinging eyes and filling lungs with each shallow breath. The metallic scent of blood mingled with the acrid smoke, a constant reminder of mortality and the stakes at hand. Prisoners were scattered, some huddled in corners, eyes wide and trembling, while others tried to move wounded companions, tripping over rubble and each other. The shrill clatter of boots echoed as guards rushed through the camp, shouting orders, rifles at the ready. Their voices were sharp, accusatory, laced with anger and confusion. Eliza's mind raced, calculating each action, predicting each movement. Every choice she made could save a life or destroy everything she had fought for. Her hands, though cold and trembling, worked with methodical precision, administering treatment to those whose cries might have gone unheard in a calmer world. From the command center, the overseer's perspective offered a stark contrast. Papers littered the floor, maps smudged with ink and soot. Reports came in at a frantic pace, detailing escapes, fires, and missing prisoners. He slammed a fist against the table, teeth clenched, eyes narrowing at each failure in control. Outside, he could see shadows moving like phantoms among the chaos, though he could not discern friend from foe. The realization that one person, one doctor, might be orchestrating parts of this chaos began to seep into his mind. The micro cliffhanger struck again. What if she was not merely saving lives, but manipulating the camp for a greater purpose? Eliza ducked into a collapsed barracks to retrieve a wounded prisoner trapped beneath beams. Dust choked her throat, sticking to her lips and hair, but she ignored it, murmuring calm reassurances to the injured man. The groan of timber threatened to collapse further, and she had to move quickly. A guard's heavy boots pounded nearby, each step sending a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She froze, pressed against the wall, heart hammering, counting breaths until the footsteps passed. Only then did she continue, lifting the debris and freeing the man. Blood slicked her hands, but she moved swiftly, tending to his wounds with improvised tools, stabilizing him enough to move. Elsewhere, the camp doctor, the cruel, calculating figure, realized that the situation had spun out of his control. His assistant trembled beside him as he demanded updates, scrutinizing every corner, every shadow, every movement of prisoners. Notes were missing, supplies moved, and whispered tales of Eliza's heroics had reached his ears. Fury mixed with fear, and he ordered guards to sweep the barracks methodically, unaware that Eliza was always one step ahead, hiding injured prisoners, concealing evidence of survival, and slipping coded messages into hidden crevices. The chaos intensified. A supply cart exploded near the perimeter, fire licking the edges of the wooden structures. Prisoners screamed, scattering in panic. Eliza, noticing two men trapped under debris, did not hesitate. She lifted splintered beams, blood and dust coating her hands, and pulled the men to safety. One cried out relief mingling with pain, the other silent, barely breathing. She applied pressure to wounds, tied makeshift bandages, and whispered instructions. The room seemed to close in, shadows stretching like fingers across walls. Punctuated by the harsh light of fires and sporadic gunshots, each micro cliffhanger forced her to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. Outside, the storm had picked up. Rain mixed with ash, soaking everyone and everything, creating a cold, slippery nightmare. Eliza slipped through the mud and rain, guiding the wounded to safer locations. Her coat clung to her body, soaked heavy, but she ignored it. Each step was perilous as guards patrolled with weapons raised, shouting and firing warning shots. In the chaos, a group of prisoners attempted an escape, bolstered by her subtle guidance and whispered instructions. She risked exposure with every gesture, her heart pounding as they slipped past guards. Hidden in the shadows and confusion, the tension escalated further when the commandant realized the missing prisoners and the failures in control. Orders were shouted, reinforcements called in, and yet the camp seemed to fight against him, as if alive and resisting. Eliza moved with uncanny precision, her awareness of every guard, prisoner, and hazard near absolute. She intervened repeatedly, patching wounds, calming panicked prisoners, and guiding escapees with silent signals. Every moment was a balancing act. If she were caught, death would be instant. If she hesitated, lives would be lost. At one point, a group of prisoners became trapped in a collapsing building. Eliza crawled through debris, smoke stinging her eyes, soot coating her face and hands, the groaning timbers threatening to crush her. She pulled one man free, then another, her own exhaustion forgotten. The fire roared around them, sparks flying dangerously close. A guard entered the burning room, rifle raised, yet she melted into the shadows just in time. Each second was a micro cliffhanger. Every breath potentially her last. The narrative alternated seamlessly between Eliza, the prisoners, and the commandant, creating a pulse-pounding rhythm. From her perspective, each movement was a life-or-death calculation. From the prisoner's perspective, she was an almost mythical figure, a beacon in the hellish storm. From the commandant's perspective, Control slipped further with every passing minute, feeding paranoia and desperation. The storm of fire, smoke, screaming, and gunfire created a sensory overload that mirrored the tension in every heart within the camp. As the night deepened, Eliza led the final group of wounded prisoners to the edge of the camp. Where temporary shelter and supplies had been prepared, she applied the last of her medical skills, improvising with bandages, splints, and scarce medicine. The storm outside raged, rain mixing with ash and blood, yet inside her mind, a different storm raged. Exhaustion, fear, hope, and determination intertwined. She had become the pivot of life and death, the fulcrum upon which the fate of hundreds rested. And as she paused, breath ragged, soaked to the bone, listening to the distant cries and approaching reinforcements, one thought thundered in her mind. The climax was not yet over. A sudden distant roar, a rumble of heavy machinery, or perhaps approaching reinforcements, made every nerve jump. The camp was no longer just a site of chaos. It was a stage for the ultimate confrontation. Guards, prisoners, the commandant, and Eliza herself were all moving toward a point of collision, where courage, cunning, and desperation would define who survived. The micro cliffhanger hung in the air. Would Eliza save the remaining prisoners, or would the camp's horrors finally overwhelm her? The storm, the smoke, the fire, and the chaos converged, setting the stage for a historic moment that would test every skill, every instinct, every ounce of courage she possessed. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the tension remained unresolved. The battle of wits, wills, and survival was far from over. The stakes had never been higher. Lives teetered on the edge, waiting for the next choice, the next action, the next second that could determine everything. Step 6, the aftermath, would reveal consequences, truths, and haunting secrets that history might never record, leaving only the chilling echo of a night that tested courage beyond measure. Asterisk. Step 6, aftermath and chilling, close 16 o'clock to 20 o'clock plus. The first light of dawn broke over the camp, casting long, trembling shadows across scorched earth and shattered buildings. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling like ghostly fingers around collapsed barracks and charred trees. The chaos of the previous night had subsided, leaving only a fragile silence, broken occasionally by distant coughs, groans, or the whisper of wind through broken windows. Eliza Morgan stood in the center of the courtyard, her coat soaked with rain and ash, her hands red from blood, soot, and exhaustion. Around her, survivors moved cautiously, tentative in their newfound freedom, their eyes wide, haunted, yet alive. Bodies lay in quiet stillness where they had fallen, some hidden beneath debris, others left in the open, a grim testament to the cost of survival. The smell of smoke and blood hung heavily, clinging to the survivors' clothes and hair, marking them as witnesses to horror and endurance. Each step Eliza took was careful, measured, aware that every action could shift the fragile balance between life and lingering danger. The camp's overseer and remaining guards had retreated, their shouts and orders gone, leaving the prisoners in a fragile, uncertain calm. The survivors whispered among themselves, recounting the miraculous rescues, the interventions of a shadowy figure in white. In the moments when hope had felt almost impossible, Eliza moved among them, offering reassurance, instructions, and care. Her medical training was now a lifeline, but her presence carried something more, a symbol of courage that no brutality could extinguish. She treated burns, bandaged deep cuts, and stabilized those with broken limbs, improvising with whatever supplies remained. Each action was meticulous, deliberate, a counterpoint to the chaos that had consumed the camp just hours before. The survivors watched her work in silence, some too shocked to speak, some overcome with gratitude. Micro cliffhangers persisted even in the aftermath. Would the authorities return? Would hidden dangers remain in the shadows? From the perspective of the prisoners, Eliza had become almost mythic, a figure who had navigated the nightmare with uncanny skill, healing, guiding, and inspiring in equal measure. One young man, his arm in a makeshift sling, whispered to another, "She moved among us like a spirit. It's untouchable, yet present in every moment." She saved us. Another added, "We will never know what horrors she saw, but she carried them as if they were hers alone." These whispered testimonies created an emotional tapestry, illustrating both the depth of suffering endured and the extraordinary bravery of one individual in the face of overwhelming odds. Eliza's own perspective was haunted. Eyes tracing the ruin around her, memories of screams, fire, and blood flashing with every step. She recalled the moments she had ducked bullets, lifted the injured from rubble, and deceived those who would have ended lives in an instant. Her body ached, her lungs burned, yet she remained focused. Aware that the night's events had irrevocably changed everything, not just for the prisoners, but for herself. She knew that the camp's secrets were far from fully revealed. Notes, coded messages, and whispers of experiments hinted at truths that the world might never see. The micro-cliffhanger lingered. What horrors had she witnessed? What decisions would continue to haunt her? A survivor produced a tattered diary, the pages smudged with soot and water, and handed it to Eliza. The entries detailed moments of courage, the miraculous interventions she had performed. In the small victories against despair, she read silently, each word a reminder of the lives saved, the suffering mitigated, and the human spirit preserved amidst unimaginable cruelty. Yet the diary also hinted at unresolved questions: the fate of certain prisoners, the undiscovered documents, and the hidden horrors that had taken place behind closed doors. The tension between relief and lingering dread was palpable as the survivors began to gather what remained of their belongings and tend to the wounded. A distant sound echoed from the surrounding hills, a low rumble. It could have been the advance of enemy forces or the arrival of reinforcements. Eliza's gaze hardened, realizing that the nightmare might not be over, that danger still lurked beyond the camp's edges. She moved to organize the survivors, ensuring the injured were safe and the vulnerable were protected. Yet her mind remained alert, anticipating the next threat. Finally, the camera pans across the camp. Scorched buildings, shattered supplies, and weary faces etched with fear, hope, and exhaustion. Eliza stands in the center, a figure of both resilience and haunting solitude. The micro-cliffhanger lingers, though many survived. The full truth of what occurred that night, and the choices she made, may never be known. A whispered question remains in the air. What did she see? What did she do? And which secrets of the camp would remain buried forever? The story closes not with resolution, but with the echo of memory, leaving viewers with a haunting, unresolved tension that invites reflection, curiosity, and anticipation for what might come next. History in this camp was recorded in actions, in survival, and in the courage of one doctor who dared to defy death itself.